And we are live, joined today with Dr. Jessica
Hinman, amazing.
who is a professor at you're a professor, right?
Or I am. Yes, creative.
I understand universities have different ranking systems, like the army would, but you don't deal with guns, you deal with English, right? English literature.
Creative writing.
Creative writing. Yes, right. Okay. And you teach currently at which university?
At Northern Kentucky University. I'm an associate professor there. Yeah.
Very
amazing.
Nice.
Pleasure. Thanks for coming on our show.
Thank you for having me.
Very excited for this. You guys are up for a real treat of a story here.
You are.
Done some investigation. We found a great story here. All righty.
Because we're going to start with Dr. Jessica, who went from being, an old,
tell us. Wait, how about
area. Yeah, where'd you come from?
Yeah, you grew up in Kentucky. Yeah, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in two places, both very rural places in America, small towns, one in West Virginia and one in Western Virginia, which is just across the border. So very mountainous place in Appalachia, kind of isolated from other places and really small town. And then
Almost
from
heaven.
there, almost heaven. There you go. And the country roads, they know that everywhere, right?
Exactly. See, I know my stuff.
We had to memorize that song to pass kindergarten to be able to sing it. So
wait,
ABCs,
seriously? Or?
Yeah, seriously. ABCs, your numbers 1 through 100, and country roads. That's it.
Wow. Okay. That came out of nowhere.
And then so wait. You grew up in like a more rural area, but you like to travel. From what you told me, you studied Middle Eastern culture in college.
Yeah, so from there I went to New York City for college. I knew I needed a change. I needed to get to the big city. And when I first got there, I intended to study music, but like most people who start studying music, you realize quickly that you're not good enough at music. You were fine in your town, but now you're in the big leagues, not good enough. So from there, it was kind of random. I was doing what college freshmen do, which is fulfilling your course requirements. And one class that still had a spot open was Intro to Islamic Civilization. And I took that in the fall of 1999. And I realized that I actually had something to bring to the table there. And which was this: I didn't know anything about the Middle East whatsoever. And so there were some people in that class that had, interests because their families were either from the Middle East, either from Israel or from the Arab countries. And in that class, they would all be somewhat fighting and disagreeing. And because I was completely...
Classic Arabs.
Yeah. Because I was completely ignorant of all of this, I would get better grades because I wasn't on one side or the other. I was just too stupid to know the difference, really. And so
it's not that you were too stupid. On the contrary, you were smart enough to leave that headache out of your life.
That's smart.
Sometimes I wish I wasn't involved in this stupid bullshit. But hey,
I mean, a lot of people do not. But so out of my ignorance, I realized I might actually have a point of view that could be helpful as, say, a journalist. My original intention was to become a journalist in the Middle East. And I left to go study abroad for Cairo on August 19th, 2001, and was still in that phase of they have different money, learning street Arabic. And then 9/11 happened. And so I kind of saw that entire thing from that point of view. And that is written about somewhat in the book, because what ended up being very funny to me, not funny, but kind of tragic from the American point of view, is that I could not get a job as a reporter in the Middle East. Americans did not want to know anything about the Middle East. They wanted to, kind of go attack, yes, as they did, tragically. And meanwhile, what I was able to do to make money was get this job as a fake violinist. So that to me tells me everything about American culture at that time.
Right there. Let's stop right there. All right. You said you wrote a book, right?
Yes, I did hear. I got it.
Amazing. Sounds like Titanic.
Sounds like Titanic.
Jessica Chichanito, how do you say it?
Jessica Chiquetto Heinemann. Yeah.
You have American Indian in your descendancy by any chance?
I don't. No, this is Italian American by people who did not know how to spell. And I'm serious. My grandparents, great grandparents, when they immigrated here, could not read or write, and it came out. Official wrote that down. It's Italian, but it's not spelled correctly, and I use it because of that reason. One of the things I do love about this country is that in a few generations you can go from being illiterate to being an English professor.
It's true.
You know, in the best
That's
ways.
amazing.
When our country is working, that's
Respect.
how it works.
Respect, Dr. Jessica. Really much respect.
Yeah, much respect. So let's take it back a little bit.
Sure.
You went through half of your life in the span of 3 minutes. So
Don't worry, there's more. There's more.
I'm glad there is. The speed we're going now is kind of scary. So you wanted to be a reporter in the Middle East, right?
Yes.
And you said you learned the street language and everything like that. So you
Poorly, shwaya.
Shway, shway, yalla!
Oh, okay. So it's gonna be like that. Cool.
Yeah. It's not. This is 20 years ago. My Arabic is now.
I know. I mean, it's what happens with language. If you don't practice enough, my dad still speaks fluent German, but that's because he talks to me and I act like I understand him. So it's fine, you know. It's nothing. It's nothing to be ashamed of. But that's pretty cool. So I would say this is your classic example of faith, right? So you wanted to be something, but somehow in some weird way of how this universe works, right? Mm-hmm. You ended up in the Middle East, like not too long after you got. So run me through the steps of how you went from studying Islamic civilization to ending up in, I believe you said Egypt, was it?
In Cairo.
Yeah, in Cairo. Okay.
So it's common in American college that during your junior year, so we have 4 years of college education, and during your junior year, you go to a different country. And to be fair, most people go to England or Spain or Italy and they party. But at that point, I knew that I really, I was a Middle Eastern Studies major. I wanted to be a journalist, and I was thinking that at that time, there were like some good developments in terms of like talks towards peace, Israel, Palestine, like, the things were looking maybe hopeful for the first time in a while. And of course that all came crashing down after 9/11 and
as per usual.
Yes. Yeah. But I was very idealistic and hopeful that I could go and, bring accurate information back to places like where I grew up, which were very rural and isolated. And I'd never met a Jewish person or a Muslim person before I left for college, so I could bring sort of accurate information back about everything to kind of more rural American audiences. That ended up not happening for a variety of reasons. So what I ended up doing was getting this ridiculous job as a fake violinist.
Okay.
And
Tell us how.
What do you mean? Yeah. What do you mean by fake? Because I don't know what a fake violinist
Nobody
is.
does, and it's kind of hard to explain at first. But essentially, I really do play violin for real.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not very good. I'm not like professional being at New York Philharmonic sort of violinist. Not like that. While I was playing for this orchestra, the microphone in front of me was off, and a big speaker system was blasting out music of a better violinist. Yeah. And it all sounded like the Titanic soundtrack, which is why the book is called Sounds Like Titanic.
So a memoir.
Yeah.
By the way, where can people get your book in case people wanted to read it?
It's everywhere. I mean, I would say if you're in the United States, please try to support your local independent or a Black-owned bookstore. But abroad, it's on Amazon, throughout Europe, and I think it just was released in Russian. I'm waiting to hear if it's going to be translated in other languages as well.
Amazing.
I mean, if you translate it in Arabic, that would be cool too.
That would be amazing, please. I hope.
Just throwing it out there,
I don't get to make these decisions, but I would love to have it translated into Arabic. So make your requests, and
I will make my request. Cool. But yeah, so let's keep on track. So you were saying
fake violinist. How do you find this job? How'd they come up to you? So you were in Egypt when this happened?
No, I was back in college after I returned from Egypt for my it was the spring of my junior year, right after I got back from Egypt, and I saw this. I was struggling to pay my college tuition, so I was always looking for more jobs. And I was already working 2 jobs, but they weren't paying very well. And I was on one of those email listservs where they just send out jobs. And one day I just see this thing. It's like, violinist wanted, play every weekend, get this money. And I was like, that's very strange, because that's not how orchestras, that's not how orchestras hire people. They have auditions, and it's very hard. And it's, but I was like, they said, send in a tape. And so I sent in a tape. And like a few days later, they called me, and I went to this office in Manhattan. And I was like, okay, now they're going to figure it out. I can't really play that well. They're going to realize this was a mistake. And it turns out they did not only not have me play my violin, there was no audition, but they didn't even interview me. They just were like, oh, here's a tax form, fill this out. You're going to start working this weekend. And I was like, oh no, but I mean, I was really excited, but I was also like, this is going to go really badly when they figure out how bad I am. And it wasn't until that weekend when I was on, it was like my training weekend. I was selling CDs, watching another violinist and flute player play behind me. And I was like, they sound so perfect for being outside where the acoustics aren't good. And this just sounds weird. And it took even me with like 10 years of violin lessons a while to realize, no, I was just hearing a CD. So they were really playing, but even just a few feet away, I wasn't really hearing what they were doing. And they played nonstop for like 8 hours while I sell CDs. And that was kind of how this entire thing worked.
Did you know that it wasn't like they were like, could you tell it was off, or was it like, yes, you could?
Yeah, but it took me a while, even with violin training and being very close for a long time. I'd say it took me 2 or 3 hours to be like, oh. And then later, I talked to the other musicians about this, and they were like, yes, like this is how it works, and it's how you keep the sound perfect no matter if you're playing outside in a mall.
Right.
But then this was done at big concert halls too.
Yeah. Okay. So can we get more context, right? Okay. So like you were playing in like different like concert. Say, where was your your symphony based off of, or was it an orchestra? What was it?
Yeah, these are great questions. Great questions. So all of this was organized by a man who, in the book, I call him the composer. And I just call him that. And he really exists. And all of this is true. He really exists. Some people, have written about this on the internet if you really want to find out who it is. But I purposely didn't name him. But he is an American composer. And he was kind of the mastermind of this entire scheme. And he had as many as like 12 different groups go out on weekends to different craft fairs, different shopping malls, doing this sort of what I call the Milli Violini, like Milli Vanilli, but Milli Violini because of the violin. Right? And so, and he was the person who wrote this music. Now, of course, this music was not like Beethoven. It was classical kind of, but it was very, very close to soundtrack music. And what people would keep saying when they came up to the table to buy CDs is, it sounds like Titanic. It sounds like Titanic.
Oh.
And at first, my first day, I was like, oh, is that a good thing, a bad thing? And people are like, I love Titanic. I'll take 10 CDs.
Right? Exactly. That's funny.
If it works, it works.
It worked. It absolutely worked. So I went from playing those small craft fairs to actually going on tour eventually with the composer all around America, 54 cities, and then to China as well.
Yikes. Yeah.
Wait, how did China get involved in the story? I'm sorry.
It's a great question, and I don't know all the answers. As you probably know, the Chinese government works entirely differently than the American government does.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate word to use.
Very different.
And we were invited there on a cultural visa, and we played to crowds up to 4,000 people at a time in Lanzhou and Shanghai and Hangzhou and Wuhan, actually. And
Patient zero.
Yeah. Well, this was back in 2004. So before Wuhan became.
Have you been tested before you got on Zoom? We are on a computer, and it is a virus. Just saying.
Yeah, but if I were to guess, I think the Chinese thought that we were the orchestra who played the actual Titanic soundtrack.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, this happens a lot. This misconception between different cultures. Yeah. Sorry. Take it away.
So doctor. Yeah. So I'm like, so you knew that what you were playing at that point when you were in China, you knew that you were faking it, right? Or were you still?
Yeah, well, really playing with the microphones off and blasting the CD out.
Okay. Yeah. Do people not get mad when they find out these things?
Honestly, like most people have no idea. And like I said, even with 10 years of violin lessons, it took me hours to figure it out myself the first time I saw it. And so most people just think it's real. And those who maybe have doubts are often probably a little too embarrassed to ask. Like, it's like, oh, I just sat through a 2-hour.
Is that fake?
Wait, was that real?
Is that real?
Right? It's an embarrassing question to ask. And so weird. Yeah.
That library behind you, is that real?
It is not.
Yeah, no,
It
it's
is
not.
real at all.
Part of the illusion.
Yes, it is a green screen.
Amazing.
I mean,
All right. Yeah. Well, what about you? Did you not feel weird about it? Like, how long were you in the orchestra for?
Yeah, so at first I did not.
How do you feel about it? Yeah.
Yeah, at first I was just happy to be making money for my tuition, which I was pretty desperate to
That's
pay.
fair.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't see why you wouldn't be like it's hustling at the end of the day, right? You got to make what you got to make. You got to grab that bread and go. It's simple as that.
Absolutely. Well
Simple as
said.
that. So it's literally like, uh, that's on me. But yeah, sorry, you were
Respect. Yeah,
saying.
keep
No,
going.
you're right.
So that's
And
how it started off.
yeah, and then think about, I was 21 years old. Think about the jobs that are available for a young woman without a college degree yet. I mean, and in that economy too, which was pretty bad in 2003. I'd worked as a waitress and as an assistant and in these low-paying jobs where you're often disrespected. Now I'm making much more money to play violin for real. No one's hearing me, but I'm playing. It was easier work. It was better paid. So at first I was pretty happy to have the job, and I was traveling everywhere, which was nice. But I worked for them for 4 years, and over that period of time, I started to actually feel a lot of effects of like being fake. So I started to have anxiety attacks on stage, because I was up there and it really didn't matter what I sounded like a lot at all. So I had a lot of time to think and to look at people in the audience. And I started to have panic attacks really about the entire thing. And I ended up quitting, because I just didn't want to be spending my life in a way like this. So the book kind of follows that whole journey of like,
Amazing.
starting out just being like, I'm making money, and then being like, no, you can't do this.
How long were you there for?
For about 4 years. And I
Okay.
started when I was 21, and I quit. And the last gig I ever played was when I just turned 25, I think. So
Can you tell us about your first gig and then like your last gig?
sure. The very first gig, I did not meet the composer. He was not there. I met a Russian violinist on a street corner in Manhattan. He's just kind of like, he was very brusque. He's very Russian, like, just get in the car, no talking. Like, very serious, right? And you can see me. I'm a pretty big cute.
Okay.
Yeah. I talk all the time, as you can tell, and laugh really loud, and kind of
Very extroverted, let's say.
Yes, Italian in my mannerisms and all of this. And he's just like this Russian guy like this for a 4-hour drive to New Hampshire. And so I was just a little weirded out by, and the next morning they put us up in hotel rooms. We get up the next morning and we go to this beautiful lake in New Hampshire, and they set up this tent and start playing violin and flute. And it's my job to be like, oh, do you like this music? Here's the CD you can buy. And people, as soon as they start that music, they press play on the CD recorder, or the CD, it was a Sony Discman back then, press play, and people just flood in and are like, oh, this music, what is this music? I'll take 10 CDs, like this sort of thing. So I'm just like passing CDs and just money coming at me, like, thousands and thousands of dollars.
Left, right, and center, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, wow.
And like, so the music you were playing, it was given to you on like sheet notes by like this composer figure, right?
Yeah. And so when
the whole thing.
Yeah, they had sheet music, and when I absolutely knew for sure this was a fake thing was that later that day in New Hampshire, the Russian violinist who I call Yevgeny in the book, he was like, "Do you want to play now?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, definitely." So I get up behind the microphone, get my violin, and I have the sheet music in front of me, and he presses play on the recorder, and I immediately lose my place, right? Because there's no conductor. I can't really hear the speakers. I don't know when to start, and I'm just like,
when should I start? And the music's playing. And you're like,
exactly.
Okay, I'll keep going.
Right. I'm just like kind of like just not even playing at that point because I'm just lost. And when I look up, this song lasts like 2 or 3 minutes. It feels like a lifetime, and because I'm just so embarrassed, like it's so bad. And I look up, and there's a crowd of people, and they're all like, like looking at me like I'm Isak Perlman or somebody, like the best violinist in the world, and all applauding and being like, you're amazing. And I was like, oh. And that's when I knew for sure.
That sounds like a fun job. I'll be honest. I'll do that for a summer. Honestly. Yeah. Just go like, okay. Yeah, sounds
Look at me, you know. And it's like,
And of course, I got better and better. And I,
Mhm.
you know, by the end of this, I really was playing exactly along to the
Do you
music.
think?
And
Yeah.
had,
Do you think you could have been like a real violinist, like playing like an actual music, or were you like? Because you remember you said earlier, like you weren't that
yeah.
high league enough to in music that you need to be really really good, right? So do you
Yeah,
think you could have if you went for it legit?
it depends on like what you mean by legit. I mean, you know, there's like rock bands out there like that use violinists
That's
and
true.
maybe something like that, but
Mhm.
New York Philharmonic or a professional orchestra, absolutely not.
I see.
You know,
Mhm.
yeah, some people make their skills into what they are, but no, I was not good. I was probably not even good enough for a good band. You know, sometimes people ask me to play for weddings who, you know, want a cheap violinist and you know,
You do it. You're like, yes,
sure.
I
I
can play.
mean, yeah, I could play a little, you know,
Every
enough.
night in my dreams.
wait,
Yes.
so yeah, okay, cool.
Nice singing.
So that's your violin era, right? This is where you were a fake violinist.
Mhm.
So right after that, you went into
Yeah, the
Dog.
chronology is this:
that
is
was
that
your cue.
I studied Middle Eastern studies in college. When I came out, you know, I had this. That's when I got this violin job. But I thought that would just pay the bills. Meanwhile, I was looking for a serious job. I wanted to go. First, I wanted to go to Egypt. Later, of course, by 2003, I wanted to go to Iraq and you know be a war reporter there and try to get accurate information. Um, but there was nobody hiring for that, and Americans really had no appetite to actually have accurate information about anything really. And I kept on with the violin job was paying my bills. Eventually, after I quit the orchestra, I went to grad school for creative writing, and that's how I became a professor today. So I kind of just focus more on the academic side of writing instead of becoming a journalist. But the entire American news industry at that point was collapsing. The internet completely upended all of our newspapers. All they were closing all the foreign bureaus. So you know, it used to be that every newspaper in America had hundreds of bureaus all over the world, so that you could get real reporting from a lot of places. But in the early 2000s, they were closing all of that. I even went to the New York Times bureau chief in Cairo, and essentially every newspaper there with Americans told me the same thing, which is like, we're not hiring anybody. You know, we might have stringers who are Egyptians to do our work for us, but we're not hiring like American reporters to go out and do in-depth reporting from here. And that was just, yeah,
That was just
tragically.
the finance of it, right? Is that you couldn't like no one was like hiring journalists then.
Yeah,
I
and
see.
the newspapers themselves were shutting down and they were losing money. And now look where we are. I mean, we're in a pandemic where no one has any accurate information about like their local news, world news, these sorts of things. So
Yeah.
It's sad to see. It's sad to see that
Mhm.
even like
yeah,
when it comes to things like news, you're not sure who to trust and where to,
yeah.
Fake
look when
news,
you're looking. I mean,
fake
it's everywhere.
violins, fake backgrounds. What's going on? What's
What's
real?
going on with the world, honestly?
What's
Yeah,
real?
no, but that's
Yeah.
Honestly. Hmm.
but seriously, yeah, like
Hmm.
what it saddens me that the news media is very, I'd say toxic if that was the right sense of words to put it.
Fortunate right
I
now.
don't. How would you describe it, doctor?
Well, I would describe it as this. When I was growing up, we had multiple, you know, in a small town in Appalachia, we had multiple newspapers, multiple ones, like
Hmm.
three in a town of 3,000. And that was a respectable job where you could make a living and raise a family and have health insurance. And they gave three different perspectives just on my little town. And all across America, we had that. And what that offered people was different points of view and also news that wasn't questioned very much because, you know, if the hospital caught on fire on Tuesday and they reported it on Wednesday, everyone could see that the hospital had been on fire,
Yeah.
and then they reported in the newspapers. It's just facts, and that's really important. And what we've seen with the closing down of all of those places is that you're absolutely right. People are very confused about where to turn for accurate information, myself included. And I'm, you know, have a PhD and I'm educated, and it's hard sometimes to determine what is real and what is fake. And in a certain way, that's what I was talking about in my book as well, is that like this violin job was a metaphor for things, you know, the violin stuff is silly and funny, but like this other stuff of not knowing whether weapons of mass destruction are real or not, or, you know, when your government's lying to you or not,
Hmm.
or when like, the pandemic is real or not, which is something,
Don't get us started.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big problem, and I do think it stems out of these smaller newspapers and then even the larger newspapers firing all their journalists and running out of money.
Whether the pandemic was real or not almost caused like the split between me and this person right here to my left, because we had a huge fight. I remember on the phone call, he was like, Ali, coronavirus is fake. I was like, bro, go out there, catch that disease, come back and tell me if it's fake.
I don't think it's fake this time. You should probably be healthy and, social distance and wear a mask and just, take care of your
Now you know who won that conversation. Now you know who won that conversation.
Jessica, I really want to know your final performance with the orchestra. How'd that go?
Yeah, so I mean, just to give you some context, sometimes
how many pieces? Yeah, how many instruments were also in the orchestra?
It depended concert by concert. So there would be these small craft fairs where there'd only be 3 of us, and then at the bigger concerts like in China or at Carnegie Hall, there would be more 20 or so musicians. It's funny. So we had these concerts in these grand concert halls all across America and China, but my last gig ever was actually again in a shopping mall, this time with a composer, and it was in January of I think 2005, and or maybe it was 2006. I'm getting my timeline wrong, but I should check my own book.
around that time.
Flip through the book. Okay.
Time is a flat circle now. But we go to.
Wait, stop that. Slow down. What? You can't just say that. Time is a flat circle.
That's a joke from the show True Detective.
I see. Okay.
Matthew McConaughey's character is always like, time is a flat circle.
Yeah, what does that mean?
I think it just means that like time is always kind of we're both in the past and the future and the present all at once. So yeah.
Time is a flat circle, Doctor.
My brain is not wired enough to understand.
Matthew McConaughey.
Concept.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey. Brilliant mind.
All right.
Yeah. So you're on the mall? You're in the mall shopping?
Yeah, we were just at this kind of crappy mall in New Jersey, and it was the last time I ever saw him. And I think the ensemble at that point had lost some money going to China, and at any rate, so instead of sending out all these musicians to do his work, he was actually driving and doing the gigs himself. And we actually had a really real conversation at that point about who he was that I do not include in the book, because at that point I was like, this is the realest thing he's ever told me, and so it's gonna stay private with me.
That's fair.
And because up until then, I'm just like, who is this goofy guy? What is his deal? Who does this like for a living?
Okay.
Come up with fake orchestras?
You want to keep it to yourself, that's fine. But I really want to know: is he as goofy in the inside as he is on the outside, or is he actually all dark and mysterious? How would you describe it?
I would say he's like many of us, a complex human being, right? So I think at first glance, you're like, this guy is a goofball, right? Because he's got these very bizarre mannerisms of how he talks and how he does things. And obviously his concert setup is, ridiculous. But then I started, as I wrote the book, it took me a long time to write this book. And as I was really thinking about it and I was getting older and more removed from the situation, I was like, but like part of why he was probably doing what he was doing is something very human, which is like, he really, really wanted to be a composer. He wanted to be a professional musician, but he wasn't that good at it. And guess who was exactly like that? Right? Yeah.
That's you?
That would be me. And it's so American too, I think, in this way of being like, okay, well, I really have this dream. I'm not very good at it, but I'm going to figure out a way to do it anyway. I'm going to find a way to achieve
Fake it till you make it.
I was just going to say that.
Literally faked it.
Yeah.
Literally faked it. Did he ever want to go legit? I don't know if I can ask this, but did he want to be a real composer, or could he have, or I don't know. It's like,
I can't speak for him, but I would assume yes. I think he really wanted, he wanted many things that, most of us want, right? To do meaningful work, to help people. One of the reasons why this wasn't such a big deal is because these concerts that people came to that were not live were for charity often, right? They supported PBS, right? So at the end of the day, it wasn't like some scam with, stealing people's money or anything like that. It was like you were still supporting.
Just wants to play. Oh, that's more wholesome. That's more wholesome.
It is. It's more complex, right? Because it's still wrong to like fake play, but it's if it's for a good cause, that makes it more complicated, right? And no one's being hurt or, you know, no musicians were harmed physically, at least in the making of this. So
I wanna ask, do you know what other musicians do this? Because I know like maybe like Mariah Carey might be faking some of her music, right? Like singing, or like Britney, or I don't know if you're aware of the general music sphere, and like what's your opinion?
yeah, so I won't pass
Faking
it. I mean, I don't know. I can't like
You
say
can't
for
say
sure
it?
for everybody, but I do think it's very common. So, and in pop music especially, so someone like, I think, you know, with Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears, and I think there have been, or Ashley Simpson. I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody.
Fair, no, fair. Yeah, we don't want to. You know,
but like, I do think it's very common, and and there's actually a human reason for that too, which is that we expect absolute perfection from people, which is weird, right? Because if you want absolute perfection, you might as well be listening to a CD instead of a real person, right?
Instead of, a robot, not a human, right? How about that?
Yeah. It is probably not as widespread in classical music, which is what made this so weird, right? Is that we all expect that maybe Britney Spears sometimes has backup tracks, but the New York Philharmonic, we would be very offended if we find out that was a CD. That said, you know, in Barack Obama's first inauguration in January of 2009, Isak Perlman, Yo-Yo Ma, and that entire quartet that played, they were lip syncing along to, and that was because it was like 13 degrees outside and their instruments couldn't work. In the cold like that. So they were playing to their own recording, whereas I was playing to somebody else who was better than me. But like
fair, yeah.
it actually, and then the next inauguration, Beyonce lip synced the Star Spangled Banner, and people get so outraged.
National anthem.
Yeah, very common.
Ali.
Very common.
Imagine in Kuwait. But you got like in cultural context. I feel like the national anthem is one of those things. I don't know, in Kuwait, if someone faked the national anthem, is that like a big deal? Or is it not? No. They're like
well, first, how hard is it to sing? Because I don't know about your national anthem, but ours is impossible to sing. So you have to have like Whitney Houston doing it, you know? Because otherwise, we're like, ah! And even Whitney Houston's a great example, because she sang along to her own. The most famous recording of the Star Spangled Banner ever was her at the Super Bowl in, I think, 1990, and that was a pre-recording of herself, so that was not live. And so we just expect impossible things from people when it comes to musical quality.
I mean, it's a natural trait of humans to crave some things that are tantalizing, I would say. Big words, Ali.
What does that mean? Tantalizing?
So, tantalizing. Basically, tantalizing means something that you really want but can't have. So humans
we have
are very
creative writing professor on the show.
Yeah,
big words.
I'll give you a degree.
What do you think? What do you think? That was pretty cool, right? That was amazing. I used to use words. I don't usually do that, but it's true. We as humans like perfection because we are naturally imperfect, right? So we look for that at every corner of every aspect of life, be it art, you know, art is a perfection, science must be perfected before we say, you know what, this fact is a fact. It's hard, you know, it's hard for people to stay perfect all the time. It's not how it works. If humans, there's a famous line, I don't know who said this, but someone said if humans were perfect all the time, then they are no longer humans, but they are gods. Right? So I think that's a very important line.
Yeah.
I mean, 21st century, so we say robots.
Yeah.
No,
robots weren't a thing back then.
Yeah, it's well said. I think you're absolutely right. And it's weird with live performance too, right? Because it's like the whole point of going to a live performance is maybe to get that more raw sound, that more raw feeling.
100%. I love like going to live performance because you hear like the artists. And they're not perfect, right? But they like improvise and like they do mistakes, and you hear them and like you hear them figuring it out along, and it's like that's part of the fun of it, right?
Exactly. But we expect people to be able to do everything perfectly, and especially I think with pop stars who are also having to dance around and all of this. That's I mean, a few of them can do it. Like Beyonce is like one of my absolute favorite. Everybody loves Beyonce, but you know, for a lot of people, that's impossible to dance around in an amazing way and then also be singing like an opera singer at the same time. That's just impossible.
It's not worth. But is it weird that I don't prefer going to live concerts? I'd rather just listen.
No, I'm actually with you on that. I like live, but I prefer actually listening for real.
Like if I go to a live concert, it's just you know, it's like a party kind of vibe with an actual performance. performance there. You know, I go for the crowd, not for the singer. If I go for the singer, it's just to look at him, you know, and behold the glory of.
Right.
I don't know. Depends on the musician,
Cole
Ali.
or
I'm sure. Like,
Kendrick
imagine if like J. Cole came down to Kuwait.
Oh
You
no,
know,
I definitely go.
yeah, you see what I mean?
no,
Yeah,
I'd buy
it
the
really
most
depends on-
expensive ticket. No,
Exactly.
no,
Yes.
literally backstage pass, after party pass, you name it, I'm there, bro. Like literally, but it's not because I want to hear him, you know, say it live. It's because I appreciate the hard work these musicians put when they step up on stage and perform, right? So as a token of my appreciation, I do attend, right? But if someone like, I don't know, who do I dislike that's a famous artist?
No,
Help
whatever.
me out here. Whoever, you
I
know?
don't want to. Yeah,
If
whoever.
they come to Kuwait, I'm not gonna go because they're famous and I have to
Mhm,
see them.
mhm,
No,
mhm.
it's, if I don't
The
agree with
music.
what you sing, what you do, then not
Yeah.
gonna be there. You know?
When people come into your shows, Dr. Jessica, was it like, did they know about them beforehand, or they, like, were you surprising people? Like, how, like, did they come to you, or did you bring them in?
I think it worked both ways. So sometimes at the craft fairs and the shopping malls, it was the first time people had ever heard this music, so they would like come, you know, gather around and be like, oh, you know, and then buy some CDs. For the concerts that were for PBS and around when we did the tour of America and China, that I think was more people who had already seen us on television and then pledged money to PBS, and then they got the free ticket to the concert. So those were maybe already fans of the composer's music, but he got that big fan base by just going around, kind of like shopping mall by shopping mall, craft fair by craft fair, Barnes and Noble bookstore by Barnes and Noble bookstore, just playing in a corner and people coming and really reacting to that music.
And I guess that's like a way you can get away with something like that, right? Is people are listening to the first time, they're not too like, they haven't heard this too many times, and they're not too analytical of it. I see. All right.
Yeah, and then, you know, in this country, classical music is very paired with class, economic class. So, you know, like I don't know if you've seen the movie Pretty Woman, but she,
Julia Roberts.
you know,
Oh,
Julia
yes.
Roberts, yeah, absolutely. And when she goes to the opera, it's like that moment where she can be upper class because she likes the opera, right? That sort of idea is very much baked into our, you know, like, oh, if you like classical music, you must be a rich person or educated, very fancy person. And that's unfortunate because I think poor and uneducated people like the music just as much as anybody else, but they feel intimidated by the whole world of classical music. And what the composer was doing was saying, you don't have to be fancy at all. You don't have to be rich or educated. You can just come, you know, and enjoy this music like anyone else. And I think that was part of his success as well. Yeah.
Respect. No, for me, like when I hear classical music, I think of like cartoons, honestly. Because when I was a kid, I grew up like watching Tom and Jerry, and they just play classical music throughout the background.
Exactly.
Like, cartoons,
Fair.
right? Yeah, and that.
I
So
almost
like,
had a fight with you on the show, but you backed that up pretty well.
no, I know, because I know exactly what I'm referencing.
Right,
Tom and Jerry had all
right.
those classic tunes. Whenever I hear classic music, it, you know, reminds me of that stuff.
With me, music is not something that's related to materialistic things. I see music as more of a soulful kind of thing. It's more like, I don't like when you said the rich people classical music, that's your basic stereotype, right? But to me, like, classical music is music at the end of the day, and it's all depending on the person's inner self. What do they identify themselves as when it comes to music, right? So here, let's do this. What do you think I like to listen to?
That's ooh.
Yeah.
Wow. I really, you know, I'm probably not good at this game in general, but
No,
let's
it is.
see.
It's a guess.
He's a young dude in Kuwait.
Yeah.
In the heart of Arabia.
Yes,
Literally
internet
a
dude.
desert country.
I'm gonna say two things. How about classical and hip hop?
You're right on hip hop. I
Not
don't deal with
classic.
classical.
Okay.
I do not deal with
You do not,
classical.
okay.
What about
Yeah.
let's try with Dr. Jessica. Let's see what she likes. Classical music.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you got it.
Wait, you listen to classical music still?
I do. So, I mean, you know what's so funny about this is that when I play violin because when I was 4 years old, I actually listened to a cartoon that had a Vivaldi's Four Seasons in the background. I did not know it. Yeah, I did not know it was that at the time, but I went to my parents and I was like, what is this music? I want to play violin. And we lived in such a mountainous rural place that then the nearest teacher was 2 hours away. So for years, every birthday, at Christmas, I'd be like, I want a violin. And they're like, no violin, there's no teachers. You know, you can't have it. Finally, on my 8th birthday, they were like, okay, we're going to drive you 2 hours there, 2 hours back for one twinkle, twinkle lesson, you know, on the violin. And they did that for years. And that's how I learned. Yeah. And I really, really, that music, I don't, you know, I struggled to even explain it. And when I was, but a lot of the little kids are like this. If you watch little kids with violins, you know, and classical music, they will just drop everything and go up to you. And, you know, when I was even playing for this composer, the kids just, they're mesmerized by it. I quote a poet in the book, and his line is, all of the children wade into the music as if it were water. And just didn't, like the kids just, you know, walk into it like it's an ocean. They can't get enough. And so yeah, I think little kids are really, really susceptible to any sort of music, and they don't have any of those ideas of like what's cool, what's not cool, what's fancy, what's not fancy. They just love it. So that's,
are you listening to what kids these days are listening to? I mean, that's the biggest proof. Like
literally. A little bit. Like I love Cardi B. I love you know. I probably
that came out of nowhere. You said you were into classical
I love
music. That's not fair.
Who doesn't? You know.
I don't.
Oh, okay. So
Team Nikki all the way.
Just
say the truth.
Yeah. Nicki Minaj.
What do you think of the Titanic, Dr. Jessica, the movie? Now that I mean, you named your book. Sounds like the Titanic.
Yeah.
What do you think of the Titanic, the movie?
So in the book, I have to get into that, right? So why was it that in this time of national disaster, right after 9/11, everybody wanted this Titanic music, right? Because the composer sold millions of CDs, and I'm like, why don't they just go get the real Titanic CD if you like it so much, right?
That's funny.
And so what I kind of came to conclude is that what that movie reminds people of, you know, everybody thinks about the ship sinking. But what its real genius was is being framed by the old woman telling the story, because what that tells us is that years after a disaster, there will be survivors who can tell the story with good humor and jokes and, like, you know, have lived long lives. And I think that after 9/11, and then like also now, you know, it's like we really, really need to be reminded of that, that we will, you know, like as Celine Dion says, go on, survive, you know, that will,
wherever you are.
And people, I think, subconsciously picked up on that, and that's why this music was so appealing to them. That's my theory, at least.
I mean, what I picked up from Titanic was basically a guy who liked a woman that's way out of his league but got the chance to. So that's what I picked up. But
Good job, Leo.
I think that's also correct. Yeah.
You go get him later.
Yes.
But it's amazing how he acted that, and now he's like way out of everyone's league.
That was when he was younger.
Oh, how the turntables, right?
Amazing.
So yeah.
Doctor, what was it like to write a memoir? What's it like 10 years, I don't know how long after this, like, when did you start writing the book? How do you know it was done?
Yeah, I started writing notes to it when I was on tour, just in my journal. I knew it was going to be something. I didn't know it was going to be a whole book. I thought maybe an article. From there, it took me 13 years of writing to write the book, if that gives you a long time, and a lot of school to learn how to do it in a way that I wanted to do it. And now that's what I do now, is help students try to figure out how to tell their own stories, because it is more complicated than it might seem at first. You think, oh, I'll just sit down and write my story. No, it's a good way to get a very badly written book. So I tried really hard to make it as exactly how I wanted to tell this story. And it took me a long time to just figure out what the story was, other than some silly orchestra thing, like all the bigger theories of how this connected to America and the Iraq War, and you know, all sorts of, you know, things having to do with gender and class and classical music. All of that came later, because I had to think it through. Like, okay, this happened to me, but what does it mean? The what does it mean takes a long time to figure out.
I see.
You see. So how hard was it to stick to, now don't take this question in the wrong way, but I really want to know, how hard is it to stick to what actually happened versus how you perceived things happen?
That's a great question. So everything, one beauty of the genre in memoir, as it's at least written in the United States, is that you have to be truthful. So you can't make anything up. But it is understood that, of course, this is just one person's point of view. In fact, I put that at the very beginning of the book. Like, this is a true memoir. It's about a fake orchestra, but this is it's not a fake memoir, because there were some of those, like, people pretending that this is true. And no, this is the truth. Is as good as I can tell it. But of course, I'm just one person. I have my own point of view. Other people might remember this differently. Other have different opinions. So, yeah, I just tried my best to be as truthful as possible. And in this case, you know, what's so funny is that the most ridiculous parts of this book are the truest, because it's the stuff I remember the most. Like the
Like
most.
what? Like what's something that's ridiculous that
The
happened?
one thing that people were like, "Oh, that couldn't have happened," but definitely did, was the composer at one point. We put on Beethoven's Symphony Number 5, you know, dun 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 dun.
Ah, yes.
And yeah,
Dun,
and
dun, dun.
he's in the RV, and he's like, "What is this music?" He's like this best-selling composer, and he was just like, "Oh, I like this. What is it?" And we're like, "What?"
That's funny.
And I know that happened exactly how it happened, because I went right to my journal to write it down exactly how it happened. And it was just so ridiculous, I could never forget it. But people reading the book are like, "Oh, that's so ridiculous. It could have never happened." So the moments like that are like the most ridiculous are the most true. And some of the ones that are like more normal, that might be me doing my best to try to piece together memories, because I didn't maybe write it down exactly right away, truthful as possible.
Interesting. Yeah. And so, okay, let's revise quickly what happened here. So, you wanted to go into music, because we talked a lot. Like, no joke. You went into music, couldn't, so you went into Islamic civilization, right?
Yes.
Where you found out Arabs can never agree on anything. And the one thing Arabs can agree on is that they don't agree on anything, right?
Which made me feel at home, because I'm from West Virginia, where it's the same. So
Country roads, right? And you ended up in Cairo, Egypt, where you wanted to be a news journalist, and they weren't hiring at the time. So you came back to be a fake violinist.
Yes.
And after that, you went on tour for like from 21 years of age to 25, where you realized that this fake shit ain't you, and you basically went into English literature, right? That's where you decided to write your book, which is a New York bestseller or a top 10.
I wish it was a New York Times bestseller. Sadly, very hard to get. They reserve that for like Michelle Obama and better people than me, not fake violinists. But yeah, no, it was but it did very well. I mean, it was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award, which is a really nice prize to have.
Very
Thank you.
Nice.
And it was Amazon Book of the Year, and got some nice reviews from places I really admire, like the New Yorker. So
I mean, New York is New York. Amazon is worldwide, so I think you kind of beat that there, you know.
Okay.
Amazing.
I mean, that's how I want to look at it. It's better than, you know. But no, that's still amazing. So your book is a book, right? Like everyone
You wrote it.
A real
no
book.
one wrote. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like everyone, every person tries to write a book, but no one writes the book that ends up being Amazon bestseller and all these accredited awards for a memoir about a fake orchestra, right? That's amazing.
That's pretty unique.
Like, it's very good. Like I'm very honored to be in your presence. And now you're teaching.
You too.
What's that like? I honestly want to know what's teaching
students. I love my students, and I talk about this just very briefly in the book, but it's real. Unlike fake violining, it's very real, right? My students need my help, and I don't have time to be thinking about myself, like when I'm trying to help them. It's just very immediate, and they have writing that they want to improve, and I do my best to help them. First, of course, with writing, but then also to look out for students who were struggling the way I was struggling in college, which was for money, for tuition, and just maybe feeling like you don't belong in college because you're coming from a different place, a smaller place, something like this. So I really love the work in that way, and you know, because it is real. There's nothing fake about it. So
I think
Having written a book yourself, I want to ask. So having written a book yourself, me and Ali are both writers here. Do you have like any tips on like writing? Like how do you know like a book is done? Know the book, right? Or like just tips.
Great questions. I mean, first, you know, writing a book seems like it's something you do yourself, but it's not. You need all these people to help you. So if you're just starting out and you're really wanting to improve your writing, I would highly recommend going to a writing workshop. And right now is nice because of the pandemic. A lot of these are online, and it's kind of like this, and you can submit your work and get 15 different opinions on it. Often they don't agree, but what it does is it builds up your sense of like how people are reacting to you on the page. And a lot of that advice is really good. And I did that for years and years. So many workshops of different groups of people telling me what they thought. And that way you're never just like going from 0 on your computer to like all of America reading your book. It's you go out little by little to groups and groups and get improvements and think it through, and professional advice from professors and editors. And then, you know, in terms of when it's done, usually if you have those groups of support, at some point, people will start to tell you, like, this is ready to go. Like, send it to a literary agent now because this is very good. I want to see this in my bookstore. And so it's kind of more natural than just writing on your computer and then New York Times bestseller. You know, it doesn't really work like that. You have to go out slowly and get advice.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for breaking it down. Like I haven't met someone like you who's written a book and a memoir, and it's great. So much pleasure.
Happy
thank
to
you.
do that.
Yeah,
Such a pleasure meeting both of you.
I think it takes a certain kind of person to write out like a whole book. One of my dreams is to actually write a book, and who knows, maybe one day I get to do that, right?
You can do it, yeah.
I mean, hopefully with, you know, God's help and Dr. Jessica Hinman's until then, we have unfortunately reached our time limit.
There's so much. I wish we could talk for more and more and more, but we're out of time. Thank you, Dr. Jessica. Much pleasure.
So nice meeting you.
If you have reached this part of the episode, please, you know, subscribe, do that stuff. You can find Dr. Jessica Hinman's book on Amazon. And
we'll link everything.
Your nearest Barnes and Nobles.
And I'll put it up.
Try to find a local bookstore if you can.
There.
Oh yeah, let's talk about. Wait, one more thing. Let's talk about like local bookstores, because right now that's the whole thing. They're getting wiped right now as we speak. Like I live in Los Angeles. I know a lot of bookstores are getting shut down.
Yeah.
Now, especially because of COVID.
Yes.
What do you have to say about? What's your opinion on,
it's
like,
so important to support independent, local, and Black-owned bookstores right now. And for multiple reasons. Yeah, Black-owned because there's a history in this country of you know, bookstores being owned only by white people, and we want to support those that are like you know, run by Black owners so that we can support those communities as well. And not only to support those communities in our local communities, but when you buy a book off of Amazon, very little of that money goes to all the people who actually produce that book. So a lot of it goes to Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, and very little of it goes to your favorite writer, Jessica Heinemann, and more importantly, even my publisher, Norton, which was an amazing publisher and an independent publisher. The editors, the copy editors, the publicists, everybody who helped me write this book gets a lesser cut when you go through Amazon. So when you go support your local bookstore, not only are you supporting your community and people who you might actually know in your neighborhood, but you're also supporting the writers and the editors and the publishers who make it.
Is it fine for me to ask, like, what, like, if you're going on Amazon buying a book versus going straight to like the publisher, how much of that cut is going to Amazon? I know.
You know what's so funny is I don't actually know. Like it's kept purposely, I think, a little confusing so that I don't actually. Even
I
know
wish you were clear. I really wish you were like, okay, this amount of money, just so like we can know, right? Like, oh, we're actually helping out these like authors, publishers, and all these people. Yeah. Put way more work into it than, you know, Jeff.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Much respect, Doc.
Support your local bookstores. Support your local bookstores. Support your local podcast hosts.
Yes. Thank you. It's so nice meeting you all. And
sorry, you were saying?
I was just going to say, I'd love to have a link to this whenever it's up. So.
It'll be up in like a day, maybe two. I'm going to end this episode by saying, hi, Dr. Jessica students. I hope you're watching this in class. Anyways, I don't know. Have you watched the full episode before?
I haven't. No, I'm looking forward to going back. Now that I know y'all are so amazing, like I'll have to go check it out.
Much pleasure.
Well, usually we end it with a salute to cover the camp. And